the wisdom of the river. How to find peace when life suddenly changes. Right now, there is a strange spinning sensation located directly behind your ears. A physical feeling of groundlessness that leaves you raw and dizzy. You feel a cold tightness gathering in the backs of your knees, a somatic clenching that happens when a familiar routine or life structure has been abruptly dismantled. You are lying awake because an unexpected change in your status, your environment, or your role has pulled the rug out from under your feet, leaving you to look at an unfamiliar landscape with deep mistrust. The mind is churning rapidly, frantically trying to build walls against the unknown. Treating this current transition as an absolute disaster. You feel completely unmoored, as if you are standing on a crumbling bank, desperately trying to freeze a rushing current that has already altered its course. The air in your room carries the clean, damp scent of wet earth, and the deep coolness of a night that has settled heavily across the window frame. A quiet, heavy humidity rests in the corners of the space, creating a still, insulated pocket of calm that keeps the noise of the world at bay. Outside, a thick mountain mist descends over the streets, dampening the echoes of traffic until the neighborhood sounds completely muffled and distant. Your mattress accepts the total, heavy weight of your tired body, holding you steady without requiring you to navigate this new territory or find your footing tonight. Your limbs can begin to unbrace from that rigid stance they held since the morning, letting go of the desperate effort to map a path that is still hidden by the fog. You are not broken because your old life path has dissolved, and this internal vertigo is not a sign that you have lost your way forever. It is simply your sensitive mind, trying its best to guard your safety by resisting a current that feels too fast to manage. Tonight, there is absolutely no need to force yourself to accept this new reality. And we are not going to demand that you instantly feel comfortable with the unfamiliar terrain. We are only going to rest together in this quiet room, allowing the rushing waters of your anxiety to widen out into the dark without asking them to find a final destination. There is a striking paradox in the way our internal resistance operates when we are thrown into a major life transition. The mind assumes that it can only find stability when it builds a massive dam to block the movement of time, attempting to force the present moment to look exactly like yesterday's territory. It believes that our security is a fragile structure that can only exist in stagnant water. But ancient Buddhist wisdom reveals that your deepest nature is actually like a vast, beautifully chiseled channel that cannot be destroyed by a change in the rivers. Of course, the agony does not come from the fluid movement of life, but from our frantic, exhausting effort to hold onto a bank that is already washed away. Maybe you have felt this too, during those late hours when the rest of the world is quiet, but your mind is replaying your old routine with a sense of bitter displacement. You lie there under the heavy dark, treating your current uncertainty as a personal failure, comparing your rootless, changing situation with the stable, solid foundations of everyone around you. It is a lonely, draining way to spend the night, viewing your new environment through the lens of constant self-defense. You do not have to master the landscape of your future career during these quiet hours, and you do not need to build a permanent bridge before your eyes are allowed to close. In a short while, we will travel together to a wet, rocky hillside terrace where an old stonecutter works with the early spring thaw, showing us a secret about the value of an altered stream. But before we journey into that misty garden, let your body fully inhabit the safety of this immediate space. You are resting in a sanctuary where no one is evaluating your adaptability, and no one is measuring your worth by how quickly you settle into a new role. The demands of the sun cannot cross the threshold of this evening, leaving you entirely free to soften into the dark without a single channel to carve. Let your shoulder blades sink down into the deep support of the bed, allowing the ground beneath you to take the full physical burden of your displacement. Your breath does not need to be managed with any sense of discipline right now, and there is no requirement to deepen its rhythm artificially. Just notice the cool moisture passing through your nostrils and the slightly warmer air leaving your frame. As you settle deeper into the mattress, every inhalation is an arrival in a space where nothing is being forced, and every exhalation is a quiet invitation for the turbulent froth inside your chest to slow down, spreading out into the wider gravity of your resting frame. What if the internal peace you have been fighting for is not something you have to achieve by keeping your life perfectly static? What if the stability you want is already present, waiting just beneath the constant, frantic effort to control the direction of the stream? Tonight, there are no milestones to reach, no maps to finalize, and no pressure to heal your entire relationship with change in a single hour. The new channels of your life can remain entirely unmeasured. The waters can glide through the dark without a clear destination, and you can allow the unfamiliar current of this transition to simply find its own level in the quiet winter night. The awareness drifts away from the immediate room, following a quiet trail that leaves the town behind, and climbs toward a high mountain ridge, where the early spring thaw has just begun to crack the winter shell. Nestled on a steep, rocky slope covered in melting gray slush stands a terraced garden, its stone walls wet with moisture under a heavy mist-laden sky just after sunrise. The air here smells crisply of wet clay, cold granite, and the sharp, clean scent of bruised spring tea leaves that have begun to peek through the remaining patches of ice. This is the mountainside domain of Master Rin, a silent stonecutter and hydrologist whose boots are permanently caked in dark silt, his movements slow and deliberate as he tends to the intricate matrix of gravity-fed water channels that snake across the hillside. Working on a lower terrace near the edge of a steep drop was a young gardener named Jiro. Jiro had spent the last several days in a state of intense internal vertigo, his chest tight with a persistent panic, his eyes constantly tracing the ruined outline of the garden beds below. A sudden winter mudslide had completely altered the shape of the mountain slope, erasing the neat, familiar rows he had spent years cultivating, and forcing the main water stream into an entirely new, unmapped direction. Jiro was deeply trapped in a cycle of resistance. He spent his mornings running frantically along the broken banks, trying to force the rushing water back into its old, destroyed pathway, viewing the change as a personal disaster, treating the unfamiliar mud as an enemy that had ruined his life. On this wet morning, as the mountain mist grew so thick that it completely swallowed the peaks above, the rushing snowmelt began to rise with a sudden, turbulent roar. Jiro watched the cold water spill over the broken edges of his old terrace plots, threatening to wash away the remaining topsoil. In a spike of desperate frustration, he picked up a rough granite churchstone, a heavy, jagged wedge of dark rock that had broken off from the upper cliffs during the slide. He slammed the stone down into the center of the new channel, trying to jam it between two rocks to act as a temporary dam, hoping to freeze the current in its tracks and protect his old boundaries. The heavy granite wedge did not stop the water, and it did not restore his old rows. Instead, the rushing mountain stream hit the flat face of the church stone with a hard, splashing slap, throwing white froth high into the chilly air. Because the block was placed against a natural downslope, the water instantly backed up, carving a violent path around the sides of the stone and tearing away a massive section of the mud bank, creating an even larger, messier flood across the terrace. Jiro fell back onto the wet gravel, his hands scraped and muddy, his knees trembling with a deep, suffocating sense of helplessness as he watched his efforts backfire. Master Rin did not shout a warning, and he did not hurry down the rocky path to fix the broken bank. He simply set down his heavy iron chisel, his boots making a soft, rhythmic crunching sound in the slush as he approached the lower terrace with an unhurried pace that seemed to match the ancient stability of the mountain. He stood at the edge of the rushing pool, his face completely calm as the cold mist settled on his gray hair. He reached down with his long wooden staff, gently tapping the submerged top of the granite church stone that Jiro had jammed into the current. He did not try to lift the heavy block away, and he did not scold the young man for causing the bank to overflow. He simply looked at the turbulent froth swirling around the stone and asked Jiro what happens to a stream when it encounters a newly carved valley. Jiro looked at the muddy water, his chest heaving, whispering that the water must fall into the lowest space, and it only becomes violent when its path is blocked by a wall. The old stonecutter nodded slowly, his staff resting steady against the granite wedge without a hint of tension. He remarked that the mountain stream had not overflowed because the mudslide was evil, or because the water had a desire to destroy the garden. It had overflowed because Jiro was demanding that the living current obey a map of yesterday's terrain, rather than aligning the channels with the actual slope of the land today. Rin explained that the vertigo Jiro felt was not caused by the movement of the water, but by his own rigid effort to stand on a bank that no longer existed. He then turned and walked back to an upper terrace, leaving the young man alone with the rushing current, listening to the soft trickling of the thaw and the immense unmoving weight of the mountain mist. The cold moisture from the low clouds pressed against Jiro's face, leaving tiny droplets of water on his eyelashes as he sat perfectly still in the slush. He remained on the gravel for a long time, his gaze fixed on the dark face of the granite church stone as the white froth slowly began to spray across his sleeves. A strange, quiet understanding began to filter through the spinning sensation behind his ears, a feeling that felt as grounding as the solid bedrock beneath the mud. He saw with sudden clarity that his frantic attempts to dam the stream were not a sign of protection, but the result of his terror of facing an unfamiliar landscape. He had been treating his own mind like a rigid stone wall that had to block the natural passage of time, bracing himself against the inevitable shifts of his life, looking at how the current simply adapted its shape to find the path of least resistance around his obstacle. He began to see that his panic was the very force that made his environment feel so hostile. The new direction of the water was no longer a catastrophe to be fought with shame, but an invitation to alter his entire relationship with the flow. This relinquishing of the heavy granite stone is not a sign that you must freeze your emotional life or become entirely cold to the deep history that once defined your security. It is not an invitation to turn yourself into a rigid winter glacier, completely indifferent to the landscape you leave behind as you move forward. The ancient insights of the Buddha point toward a much softer, gentler realization about how we carry our invisible transitions. When we look closely at our chronic internal vertigo, we discover that the true exhaustion does not come from the simple fact that an old bank has crumbled or a familiar road was swept away. The real suffering deepens when the mind refuses to let the water find its own path, constantly throwing obstacles into the new stream, demanding that the current flow back up the mountain. In our daily lives, we often mistake a tight, agonizing resistance for a form of necessary loyalty to our past. We believe that if we replay our old routines enough times, or if we fight the current with enough fury, we can somehow force our environment to return to its original design. This internal clenching is a quiet form of craving, a desperate demand that the landscape must stop shifting to make us feel emotionally safe today. When we exist in this state, we are constantly stretching our own internal boundaries past their natural limit, leaving no space for the spirit to discover the fresh green growth waiting on the lower terraces. Consider how much extra friction you introduce to your tired body when you scold yourself for still feeling disoriented by a sudden change in your circumstances. The original disruption was a single, passing event, like a sudden slide of earth that altered a small garden during a single afternoon of storm. But the mind immediately panics, treating that unexpected movement as a catastrophic failure that must be corrected through endless mental fighting. We insert the heavy wedge of our self-judgment, pushing it repeatedly into the soft tissue of our vulnerability, hoping to force a rigid stability where a natural fluidity is trying to emerge. We layer an entirely new layer of self-inflicted shame on top of the original wound, turning a moving current into a stagnant, churning pool of internal grief. True mindfulness, within this mist-laden terrace of your consciousness, is simply the willingness to notice the exact moment your fingers lock around the rough edges of your grievances. It is the ability to see the turbulent water without picking up a jagged piece of rock to build a desperate wall against it. You recognize the profound ache of losing your old position. You feel the physical tightness gathering behind your knees, but you do not allow that sensation to drag you back onto the wheel of old explanations. You become like the old stonecutter, stepping back from the broken bank, realizing that what your spirit needs right now is not more blocking, but a total suspension of the artificial barriers. This demands an immense sense of self-compassion, which is nothing more than the courage to meet your own unmapped transition, without turning it into an indictment against your character. Your desire to return to a familiar baseline or to find absolute certainty in a new role is not a defect, but a naturally tender human reflex that simply has nowhere to go in the current movement. When you catch your mind building elaborate defenses against an unfamiliar environment, you can look at that process with a completely soft, non-judgmental gaze. You can acknowledge that your internal coordinator is simply trying to keep you safe from the unknown, even if its rigid methods are currently wearing your spirit down to wet silt. The reality of our human journey is inherently fluid, shifting and changing its design like the rising spring fog that passes through the pine branches on the cliffside. This constant transformation can feel deeply threatening to a mind that seeks absolute control, yet it is also the very opening through which true emotional freedom enters. The heavy, unyielding situations that feel so solid and permanent tonight are actually subject to the same laws of movement as everything else in this world. They only keep their crushing weight when we continuously apply the artificial tension of our resistance. When we drop the rigid metrics of our self-judgment, the old pathways naturally lose their form, relaxing into the wider, spacious dark of the evening. Letting go does not mean you pretend the displacement never occurred, or that you automatically approve of the way your life was disrupted by external factors. It simply means you stop using your own living energy to keep a dead boundary alive in your bedroom tonight. It is the wisdom to see that you can carry a deep sense of care for your history, without allowing that care to become a lifelong sentence of internal suffering. You are giving your awareness permission to find its own natural channels, not by forcing the current to give you an answer, but by trusting the quiet, empty space that opens when you leave the banks entirely. Slowly, this quiet understanding stops being a distant philosophy, and it begins to touch the immediate texture of your resting body. You start to see that the sanctuary you have been searching for is not hidden at the end of a long, exhausting fight against the passage of time. It is found the very moment you allow the water to level out, stepping off the treadmill of constant mental rewriting. Even if it is only for the duration of this single quiet night, the broken banks can remain precisely as they are, rough and incomplete, without threatening your fundamental worth. You can choose to be the vast, undisturbed mountain within which the stream rests, completely anchored by an internal peace that needs no explanation from the past to authorize its rest. If it feels right inside your body, let us step into a quiet chamber of soft observation together. There is no need to adjust your position with any sense of sudden urgency, or to strive for a rigid ideal of perfection tonight. Simply allow your physical frame to melt into the steady support beneath you, recognizing that right now, you have absolutely no roles to perform and no maps to finalize. The day has already locked its gates. The voices of expectation have grown quiet across the distance, and the future has not yet arrived to carve its demands into your skin. Perhaps you can bring your attention to the natural, effortless movement of your lower torso. You do not need to deepen your breathing artificially, and there is no requirement to master a complex pattern of inhalation or exhalation right now. Just observe the air as it arrives, cool and nameless, and notice how it departs, carrying a small fraction of your internal friction out into the room. With each quiet release of the breath, you might invite the tiny muscles around your knees to unhook, letting the skin across your brow become loose, like an unwritten sheet of parchment left under a soft light. As you rest here, a specific, heavy thought may drift into the center of your awareness. It might be a memory of an old routine, a persistent worry about an unfamiliar role at work, or a quiet sense of frustration for not finding your footing during the afternoon. Instead of pushing that thought away with anger, and instead of diving into its story to fix it, simply note its presence. Even noticing is enough, for it shows you are no longer drowning in the churning pool of that old anxiety. You can return whenever you are ready to this simple space of observation, letting the mental pattern receive a gentle name, labeling it quietly as damming, or blocking, or guarding the banks. Now, imagine holding that heavy, jagged granite chert stone we observed inside Master Rince's mountainside garden. Picture its rough, dark mass resting in the open, uncurled palm of your mind, its sharp edges catching the dim silver light of the morning mist. That granite wedge represents every lost position, every fear of an uncertain future, and every rigid demand for absolute stability you have been carrying since your youth. That heavy obstacle is the exact shape of your current emotional fatigue. It is the physical manifestation of your mind trying to maintain absolute, punishing control over a current that has its own natural movement and direction. If it feels safe, try letting that granite stone go completely in your mind's eye, picturing it slipping from your fingers and setting down onto the solid bedrock with a dull, final thud. There is no need to rush this image, and nothing needs to change instantly within your body right now. Just observe what happens when the long, turbulent lines of your thoughts are allowed to go completely slack, sagging down into a soft, unweighted wave that requires no effort to hold in place. As that tension leaves your frame, imagine the wide, stone-lined basin within your lower torso beginning to open and receive the current. Watch the frantic, churning froth inside your chest begin to widen out and slow down, expanding into a broad pool that requires no walls to contain its shape. With every breath you take, feel that identical softening taking place behind your shoulder blades, down through your spine, and into your legs. The rigid, frozen molds of your ancient resistances are losing their form, spreading out into a much wider, more fluid landscape of simple presence. The stream does not need to stop, and you do not need to destroy your history to find peace tonight. It simply glides there, a quiet, unweighted current that makes a low, soothing murmur as it moves through the open stone channels. You can let that imagery change now, allowing the mountainside terrace and the stones to dissolve back into the dark background of your mind, leaving only the steady, spacious sensation of your own breathing body. There is absolutely no pressure on you to achieve total mental silence or a sudden transformation tonight. Healing is a gradual uncoiling of old internal bracing patterns, not a violent event that happens in a single hour. You are fully permitted to carry a small amount of residual worry in the background, without needing to analyze it or judge it as a mistake. Just remaining aware of the weight you have been carrying is a profound act of self-preservation. Perhaps you can feel the heavy weight of your hips sinking deeper into the mattress, letting gravity perform the work of holding you steady without your personal effort. Your hands can remain open, completely empty of tools, fully excused from the work of building a permanent barrier against the passage of time. You are returning to the uncomplicated truth of the present moment, where the room is safe, the mist has settled, and the night is slowly unfolding its quiet architecture around your bed. Whenever you are ready, you can simply let your attention rest on the natural boundary, where your breath meets the cool air of the room. You have maintained the tension for many long miles, and you have guarded the old banks with immense loyalty through the heat of the day. Now the stone is dropped. The current has found its natural relaxation in the dark, and you are fully permitted to exist without a single map attached to your name. 3 weeks after the mountain mudslide had forced the water into its unmapped descent, a freezing drizzle blanketed the lower terraces, locking the garden in a cold, gray stillness. The old irrigation ditches that Jiro had spent his youth clearing sat completely dried up, filled with nothing but dead pine needles and hardened silt. The young gardener spent his mornings wandering among the abandoned plots, his fingers raw from the chilly wind, his chest tight with a persistent, heavy bitterness. He had refused to plant a single seed in the new mud banks, treating the altered slope as a hostile intruder that had stripped away his authority and left him exposed to a completely unpredictable future. He spent hours tracing the old boundaries with a wooden rake, unable to look at the new channels without a sharp surge of internal grief. On this cloudy morning, Master Rin did not ask Jiro to rebuild the broken stone walls, and he did not instruct him to dig out the old buried channels. Instead, the elderly stonecutter placed a flat cedarwood skimming board into Jiro's hands, its dark surface worn smooth from years of clearing alpine pools. Rin quietly requested that Jiro walk down to the lowest terrace basin, where the new current had formed a wide, muddy pool and skimmed the floating mountain silt from the water's surface. When Jiro heard this request, a hot wave of irritation rushed into his chest, his throat tightening with an intense, defensive reluctance. He felt that working on the new basin was an admission of defeat, a formal acceptance of a disaster that had ruined his life's work. He stood at the edge of the new slope, his hands gripping the wooden handle of the skimming board, his mind spinning a fast web of arguments to avoid the chore. He felt a strong urge to toss the board into the brush and leave the mountain garden entirely, preferring the cold numbness of his anger over the vulnerability of cooperating with the new terrain. He looked down at the wide pool, expecting to find Master Rin watching him with an air of strict authority. But the old stonecutter was already kneeling near a rocky outcrop, his attention entirely fixed on a tiny patch of green moss. Rin's presence was completely quiet and neutral, like a massive block of mountain granite that remained undisturbed by the passing fog. Jiro closed his eyes for a single slow breath, intentionally choosing to sit with the dizzying surge of uncertainty rather than allowing it to dictate his steps. He noted the sharp clenching behind his knees, recognizing that his defensive panic was not a universal truth about his situation, but a protective shield against the unknown. He stepped onto the wet gravel of the new terrace, lowered the flat cedarwood board into the dark water, and began a slow, horizontal stroke. He felt the heavy drag of the wet clay against the wood as he swept the floating debris toward the outer bank. With each methodical sweep of the board, Jiro watched the dark, churning froth separate from the clear stream water underneath. He worked with a slow, deliberate discipline that required no immediate answers from the mountain, simply clearing the channels step by step in the quiet morning air. As the floating silt cleared away under his steady strokes, the morning light filtered through the low clouds, striking the very bottom of the new stone-lined basin. Jiro's breath caught in his throat, his arms stopping mid-stroke as he looked through the clear water, nourished by the mineral-rich mud of the slide. Hundreds of tiny wild mountain tea sprouts were beginning to uncurl from the gravel beds at the bottom of the pool. This rare variety of tea required the sudden, intense disturbance of a mudslide to crack its ancient seed husks, meaning it could never have taken root in the old dry soil of the previous garden plots. The very current that Jiro had fought with so much fury was the exact force needed to bring this hidden harvest to life. The new direction of the stream was not a failure of his design, but the opening of a deeper, more resilient landscape. He did not instantly become a joyful master of change, and the memory of his lost garden beds did not vanish from his heart, but a subtle, permanent transformation altered his stance toward his own suffering. He looked down at the flat cedar board, no longer seeing it as a symbol of exile, but as a simple tool of partnership with the living mountain. He carefully laid the board against a wet rock, wiped the dark clay from his sleeves, and sat down at the edge of the new pool without a single wall left to build in his mind. When we look deeper into the architecture of our own exhaustion, we begin to discover the hidden gears that keep our suffering in motion. We live under the constant illusion that if we hold ourselves rigidly enough, we can somehow dictate the behavior of the world around us. We use our analytical minds to rehearse future scripts, to replay old conversations with bitter regret, and to construct elaborate defenses against scenarios that may never come to pass. This constant internal labor is driven by an underlying terror of the unknown, a belief that an unexpected shift in our reality will completely destroy our foundation. We treat our internal space as a battlefield where every single uninvited thought must be subdued, and where every flash of anxiety must be instantly corrected through internal scolding. This mental pattern is exactly how we convert a passing moment of vulnerability into a permanent, heavy identity of displacement. We take the raw, natural discomfort of being a human being in an unpredictable world, and we immediately wrap it in layers of profound self-judgment. We tell ourselves that if we were truly wise, or if we were spiritually mature, our minds would be as silent as a desert night. We try to repair our fragile sense of peace by using shame as a tool, wrapping our consciousness in a tight grip of constant correction. In doing so, we become completely trapped in our own defense mechanisms, mistaking the frantic ticking of our protective thoughts for the truth of who we actually are. The ancient insights of the Buddha provide a beautiful, liberating distinction that can help your tired mind find its true center tonight. There is a fundamental difference between the natural friction that life introduces to our path, and the immense weight of suffering that our resistance adds afterward. The basic unexpected events of our existence, like the sudden freezing rain that beats against a paper screen door, are simply a part of living. They arrive without our permission, shaking our stability for a temporary moment. But they do not possess the power to break our deepest spirit. The agony begins when we refuse to let the day unfold naturally, when we spend our precious energy trying to force an unpredictable reality into a rigid box. Imagine a slow, grinding wheel of a grain mill that has been designed to process only small kernels. If a stray piece of heavy flint falls into the hopper, the initial jolt is just a single sudden impact against the stone teeth. This represents the basic pain that life brings. But if the operator panics at the noise and forces the iron lever down with intense fury to grind the flint into dust anyway, the axle will overheat and seize under the artificial strain. The presence of the stone was an accident of the harvest, but the desperate demand that the mill must never skip a beat is what destroys the machinery. This is exactly how our hypervigilance operates within our chest. The original transition is unexpected, but our immediate, urgent need to override it through shame is what creates the suffocating tightness that keeps us awake at night. True serenity does not require you to live a life where the stone never falls, or where your mind never experiences a single ripple of fear. That is an unachievable ideal, a decorative mirage that only forces you to grind your internal spirit tighter out of frustration. True freedom arrives when you alter your entire relationship with that initial vulnerability, recognizing that you can allow the texture of the moment to exist without turning it into a personal failure. You can notice the sudden surge of an anxious thought. You can feel the old expectation rising in your throat, and you can simply let that energy move through your space without treating it as an absolute emergency. You are no longer trying to force your life to look like a permanent stone monument, for you are learning to trust the raw, uncarved nature that anchors you underneath the noise. When you step off the treadmill of constant self-fixation, you discover that you do not need to use shame to manage your internal world. Your fear of entering an unfamiliar landscape is not an enemy to be conquered, but an overstimulated guardian that simply needs to be shown the quiet water waiting in the basin below. By allowing your awareness to drop down into that lower, settled space, you give the old ancestral bracing permission to naturally disperse. You stop interpreting your tiredness as a personal defect, and you start seeing it as a temporary moving part within a much larger, more spacious architecture. The world may continue to hold high expectations for a little while longer, but the core of your being remains entirely unbothered, resting heavily in its own silent gravity. This internal vertigo does not only occur on a remote mountainside terrace during a cold spring thaw. It plays out continuously in the quiet, modern landscapes of your everyday life. You experience this aggressive damming every time you look down at your digital screen, waiting for an answer to an unreturned text, feeling your internal muscles tighten with every passing minute of digital silence. It happens when you lie perfectly still at midnight, replaying a minor flaw in your performance from an early morning meeting, turning the key of your self-analysis until your neck aches from the strain. You feel it when you look at the curated, polished trajectories of your peers on your phone, immediately concluding that your own slow, organic growth is an absolute failure. We carry an immense amount of unvoiced pressure while moving through our modern schedules, offering a smooth, smiling mask to our colleagues while our internal space is vibrating with the fear of being exposed as inadequate. We try to micromanage the emotional climate of our relationships, hoping that if we can just control every external variable, we can prevent our lives from fracturing. We look to our devices for a brief hit of reassurance, trying to use a glass screen to patch over a somatic tremor that actually requires deep, uncarved space. When we finally do give ourselves permission to sit down or close our eyes, a fierce wave of historical guilt instantly arises, whispering that stillness is a luxury we have not yet produced enough success to deserve. Bringing this ancient, stone-channeled stream wisdom into your daily reality means discovering how to introduce a small pause before you allow an old reaction to claim your body. It means that when a sudden panic tells you to over-prepare for a routine conversation, You stop for the duration of a single, unhurried breath. You do not try to crush the protective impulse, and you do not scold yourself for feeling small. You simply observe the frantic energy rising behind your ribs, recognizing it as an old, inherited script trying to dictate your current posture. By giving that pattern a moment of open visibility, you choose not to obey its rigid command, allowing the churning sediment to settle before it can warp your entire evening. You can care intensely about your commitments, your loved ones, and your future, without pressing your fingers so tightly against the banks that your water turns to violent foam. True alignment is practicing the art of moving through your duties with a loose, flexible grip, understanding that you can offer your presence without needing to guarantee a perfectly static outcome. When you feel the familiar urge to perform arising, you can remember the raw, unpolished mud basin that grows beautiful wild tea precisely because of its sudden disturbance. You can allow your awareness to drop below the internal commentary of your critics, anchoring yourself in the solid, unembellished center of your own immediate reality. You do not need to check a single box or fulfill a single childhood expectation to qualify for a period of absolute non-doing tonight. Rest is not a decorative prize reserved for the flawless achiever, but the very basin of clear water that keeps your internal slate clean and resilient over the years. When you let your limbs sink into the bed without demanding a blueprint for next week, you are letting the heavy stone monument of your reputation drop completely into the dark ground. You are allowing the micro-components of your consciousness to find their natural clearance, not by forcing them to look perfect, but by trusting the vast, unwritten space that naturally exists when the old tool is set down. This subtle shift in your daily rhythm does not mean your life will suddenly become free of challenging conversations, unexpected delays, or real human weight. The world will continue to present you with unpredictable seasons, complicated dynamics, and moments of profound uncertainty. But you will no longer meet those moments by locking your joints into a state of brittle compliance. You will discover that you can stand in the middle of a demanding week with a soft, spacious heart, moving through your hours with a measured, unhurried gait, slowly learning to exist as the wide, raw terrace within which the stream is guided, fully anchored by an internal peace that needs no external crest to validate its existence. The quiet, wet mountainside terrace is fading now into the complete, dark stillness of the midnight hour. Outside, the rising mountain mist has covered every rocky outcrop and broken slope, absorbing the last faint echoes of the turbulent streams until the landscape feels completely soft, cool, and silent. Inside the garden, the rushing currents have found their natural level, flowing smoothly through the hand-carved stone irrigation channels without a single splash of white froth. The heavy granite church stone rests loose on the lower bank, its dark face completely still. Having finished its resistance against the current, the cedarwood skimming board sits quietly against a mossy ridge, its handle dry, carrying no active mountain silt across the pools. There are no more banks to patch, no more rows to measure, and no more maps to finalize before the morning sun touches the new tea sprouts. Your physical form is becoming incredibly heavy, sinking down into the supportive expanse of your bedding like clear mountain water losing its turbulent froth and settling perfectly flat into a smooth stone basin. Let the small muscles around your knees and behind your ears unhook completely, releasing the hidden, historical tightness that kept your frame locked in a defensive stance through the demanding hours of the transition. Your limbs rest slack and empty of momentum, abandoning the old, frantic habit of building barriers against the natural passage of time. Your shoulders are perfectly soft, your spine widening against the mattress, fully excused from the lifelong labor of freezing the river of change to keep yourself emotionally safe. Your breathing has slowed to a faint, effortless murmur, a quiet tide that matches the deep, unmoving mist that shelters the pine grove outside your window pane. Each quiet inhalation is an arrival in a space where nothing is being forced, and each quiet exhalation is the slow, smooth leveling of the internal waters that kept your spirit tightly bound. You are no longer evaluating your adaptability. You are no longer replaying your old routines. And you are no longer checking to see if you have discovered enough certainty to qualify for rest. The entire theater of your displacement has dissolved into the shadows, leaving you completely nameless, unmeasured, and free within the deep dark. The deep wisdom of the altered stream is drifting quietly into the center of your heart, bypassing your analytical thoughts entirely. You are absorbing the profound peace of the new terrain, realizing that your true essence was never the static bank you were trying so hard to defend through your panic. You are letting the unfamiliar current of your life simply slide through the darkness, dropping down beneath the memory of your disruptions into the immense sanctuary of your simple, immediate presence. You have absolute permission to stop solving your life for tonight, for there are no pathways to map in this dark room, and no milestones waiting to be achieved before your eyes are allowed to close. The world can continue its unpredictable shifting when the sun returns, but your inner garden remains entirely unbothered, resting heavily in its own silent gravity. You are allowed to slip away into the unwritten dark that remains when the heavy armor of your resistance is left on the stone floorboards. The sediment has settled completely at the bottom of the basin. The water is flat, and the vast, unpolished canvas of the night is fully prepared to shelter your sleep without requiring a single explanation in return. Let the final lines of your displacement soften until they blend into the quiet, falling mist. What if the stability you have spent your whole life trying to guard by standing still was always waiting for you in your willingness to glide with the unmapped stream? The mind may hesitate at the edge of this quiet expanse, unaccustomed to an atmosphere where no metrics are being enforced and no progress is being tracked. For so many years, the habit of constant self-defense has been your constant companion, a vigilant inner coordinator that whispered that any moment of relaxation was a dangerous vulnerability. You believed that if you did not constantly supervise the banks of your life, the entire structure would split apart or wash away beyond recognition. Yet, as you lie here in the deep, unmeasured dark of the winter night, the falling mist outside your window continues to deaden the old, frantic rhythms of expectation. You are beginning to see that the constant tightening of your grip did not protect the terrain. It only made your knees too rigid to adapt to the natural slope when the design began to change on its own. Let your awareness sink another layer into the absolute stillness of your room, allowing the physical weight of your chest to expand and settle without a single effort. There is a profound, instinctual intelligence in your muscles that knows exactly how to unravel when the analytical mind drops its tools and steps away from the broken banks. This internal softening does not require you to master a hidden technique. It does not demand a sudden breakthrough of spiritual clarity, and it certainly does not ask you to erase the memory of your past routines. It simply invites you to leave the water flat in the basin, to stop running your fingers over the rough edges of yesterday's disruptions, and to let the raw, uncarved surface of your presence just be. Even if a faint whisper of unfinished business continues to hover in the background of your thoughts, you can simply let it drift like a stray drop of moisture, completely harmless, completely distant, finding its own quiet baseline in the dark. Think of how the quiet mountainside garden appears when the heavy cedar gate has been barred for the night, and the last ripple in the settling pool has turned to a silent, glassy sheet. The stone walls and the hand-carved channels do not vanish into the gloom, but their sharp, demanding outlines soften into the vast, protective shadow of the mountain. The terrace is still completely intact, perfectly capable of handling the rushing snowmelt and guiding the fresh streams when the new season arrives. But right now, it has absolutely nothing to prove to the silence. It does not need to justify its existence by producing a constant stream of predictable answers. It simply rests, anchored by the heavy, unchanging gravity of the bedrock beneath the clay, entirely content to let the cold fog move through the pines without a single drop of resistance. You are fully permitted to inhabit that same unbothered stillness tonight, letting the urgent outlines of your modern schedule soften and fade into the cool, dark air around your bed. The texts that remain unanswered, the transitions that still look completely unfinished, and the personal roles that seem to be moving much slower than the lives of those around you, do not need to be resolved before your eyes can close. They can remain precisely as they are, rough, incomplete, and uncertain. resting safely in the wide, patient custody of the unknown while your tired spirit drops far beneath the surface of the day's evaluations. True peace is not a destination where every single path of your history has been perfectly straightened, and every question has been answered with absolute precision. It is the profound, liberating capacity to lay your head down right in the middle of the unfamiliar design, letting your palms uncurl and your breath go loose, while the world continues its unpredictable turning in the dark. With each quiet breath that travels through your frame, feel the wide, concentric rings of your awareness opening up even further, creating spacious chambers where no friction can take place. The air moves through your body easily, a neutral and unhurried traveler that reminds you of the native resilience that has always lived beneath your defensive armor. You are returning home to a version of yourself that existed long before you were taught that you had to be perfectly static to be worthy of love and safety. You are returning to the clear, open consciousness that simply observes the passage of the hours without ever being diminished or defined by the changes that fell across the landscape. You are the vast, solid mountain, not the transient storm that shifts the topsoil. You are the deep, dark sea of the night, not the small clouds that pass across its face. Let the total weight of your frame sink deeper into the support of the bed, letting go of the subtle, invisible bracing that lives behind your eyes and around the corners of your jaw. There are no horizons to scan in this quiet room, no sudden alterations to defend against, and no hidden mistakes to repair within the steady, comforting silence of the house. Your long afternoon of loyal guarding has reached its natural boundaries, and the winter night has arrived to take over the watch, wrapping your entire life in a soft, seamless blanket of absolute safety. You do not need to carry the weight of tomorrow's navigation before the morning light arrives to guide your steps. For now, the heavy stone is dropped, the skimming board is still, and you are fully allowed to dissolve into the spacious, timeless dark that has been waiting all along to receive your weary heart. The silence continues to deepen, spreading outward from your chest like clean water moving across a smooth piece of granite, untying the remaining fibers of your day until they are completely loose and transparent. There is no longer any channel to dig, no reputation to maintain, and no historical script that requires your continuous presence. Every element of your awareness is slowing down to a faint whisper, easing into a state of non-resistance where the boundaries of your identity feel beautifully soft, open, and light. You are drifting now in the vast, unmeasured current of the night, fully supported by the steady ground, entirely free from the obligation to be anything at all. The workspace is dark, the stream is quiet, and your heart is fully permitted to let go of the pattern, falling gently into the deep, dreamless rest that has been waiting all along to welcome you home. This welcoming home is not a temporary shelter that you must earn through a frantic race against the morning hours, nor is it a conditional prize that can be taken away when your life alters its course once more. It is the vast baseline reality of your consciousness, a deep and unblemished ground that remains completely untroubled by the swirling foam of temporary transformations. As the weight of your body presses deep into the bedding, imagine the last particles of fine mountain silt within that stone basin slowly losing their momentum, drifting downward through the cool, clear water until they rest perfectly flat against the granite bedrock. The turbulence has entirely spent its force, leaving the liquid surface so smooth and undisturbed that it becomes a flawless mirror for the vast dark sky above. You are no longer required to filter the stream. You are no longer required to dredge the channels, and you can allow the deep sediment of your daily worries to sink completely out of sight. The mind often struggles to imagine a safety that does not rely on absolute control, believing that if it stops its hypervigilant scanning for even a single hour, some unseen current will carry away its remaining treasures. We treat our internal environment as a fragile mechanism that must be constantly guarded against the natural movement of the world, building elaborate mental dams out of our anxiety to freeze our circumstances in place. But look closely at the true nature of this winter night, where the thick mist softens the edges of every rigid structure, showing us that true resilience does not live in our resistance to the thaw. True strength is found in the deep, quiet capacity of the earth to receive the changing waters, allowing the old pathways to dissolve so that a more profound and beautiful harvest can climb through the soil. You do not need to preserve a dead boundary to be safe tonight, for the very space that feels so unfamiliar and groundless right now is the exact terrain where your spirit is learning to widen its banks. Let the comforting, heavy density of this understanding settle deep into your physical core, warming the spaces between your ribs and smoothing out the long muscles of your lower back. Your body does not need to stay on high alert to protect your future, and your mind does not need to finalize a single plan before your awareness is permitted to dissolve into the dark. Every inhalation is a gentle reminder that you are entirely separate from the frantic commentary of your thoughts, a spacious and silent sky that merely observes the passing weather without ever being altered by the storm. Every exhalation is a quiet invitation to let the remaining layers of your identity drop onto the floorboards, leaving you entirely light, nameless and untethered as you drift further away from the waking shore. Think of how the wild tea sprouts rest deep beneath the clear, level surface of the mountain pool during these quiet midnight hours, completely unconcerned with the grand designs of the farmers or the previous shape of the terrace walls. They do not hurry their growth to meet an artificial deadline, and they do not carry a sense of failure because the earth shifted beneath their roots during the winter storm. They simply exist in a state of perfect, organic suchness, absorbing the rich minerals of the new silt, trusting the slow and silent laws of nature to unfold their leaves when the proper season arrives. You can allow your own inner growth to rest in that same patient custody tonight, letting go of the exhausting demand to be further along on your path than you actually are. The current has placed you precisely where your spirit needs to open, and you can trust the quiet water to hold you steady without a single ounce of your personal effort. The silence of your room continues to expand, a deep and velvet darkness that softens the sharp angles of your modern responsibilities until they lose their form completely. The digital world has turned off its lights, the voices of comparison have retreated into the fog, and there is not a single person standing over your bed to measure the efficiency of your resting hours. You are fully permitted to be completely unproductive tonight, to let the unfinished tasks sit in the shadows like uncarved stones, entirely free from the obligation to repair your life before the sun returns. You are entering a sacred sanctuary of non-doing, a boundless realm where your worth is an absolute and unchanging truth that requires no masterpieces, no static routines, and no external approval to validate its existence. With every slow, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest, feel yourself sinking deeper into the vast undercurrent of the evening, letting the heavy gravity of the bed take the full physical burden of your journey. Your hands are perfectly loose, your fingers are uncurled, and the long lines of tension that lived behind your knees have completely dissolved into a smooth, comforting warmth that spreads through your entire frame. You are no longer replaying the mistakes of the previous season. You are no longer rehearsing the defense scripts of tomorrow, and you are no longer trying to force the river of time to flow backward. You are simply the deep, quiet basin within which the water has found its perfect equilibrium, an unchanging mirror of peace that reflects nothing but the immense, protective shadow of the night. The remaining imagery of the mountainside garden and the stonecutter begins to melt into the soft, dark background of your awareness, leaving only the steady, soothing sound of your own breathing body. The iron chisels are silent. The cedar skimming board is still. The black clay has found its rest at the bottom of the pool, and the entire valley has surrendered to the white silence of the mist. There is nothing left to guard against, nothing left to control, and no old territory left to mourn within the wide, patient safety of this room. You are fully permitted to let go of the map, allowing your heart to follow the slow, steady leveling of the stream as it carries you home into a profound, dreamless, and unmeasured sleep. Let your mind float out into that wide, transparent dark, where the boundaries of your anxiety become completely weightless, dissolving like a drop of clear water falling into a silent mountain lake. You have stood on the crumbling bank for many long miles, and you have fought the current with immense loyalty through the heat of the day. But now the stone is dropped, The channels are open, and the night has arrived to wash away the last traces of your fatigue. You are returning to the primitive, uncarved center of your being, a deep well of tranquility that has never been touched by the disruptions of the outer world. The workspace is completely dark, the waters are perfectly flat, and you are fully allowed to exist without a single boundary attached to your name, resting heavily in an ancient, unbroken peace that needs no explanation to authorize its rest. As the last echoes of the waking world fade into the absolute quiet of the midnight hour, the entire universe seems to draw a single, collective breath of total surrender, wrapping your life in a soft, seamless blanket of absolute safety. The future can wait in the fog until the sun returns to guide your fingers, for right now, there are no channels to dig, no roles to maintain, and no historical scripts that require your continuous presence. Every element of your consciousness is slowing down to a faint whisper, easing into a state of pure non-resistance where you are completely free to dissolve into the spacious dark. The mountain is still, the stream is level, and your heart is fully permitted to drop beneath the surface of the day, falling gently into the deep, dreamless rest that has been waiting all along to welcome you home. The deep, dreamless rest expands even further, expanding the hidden spaces of your consciousness until every remaining thread of tension is entirely unraveled by the heavy quiet of the room. You are sinking past the layer of memories, past the unfinished blueprints of your career, and past the persistent urge to evaluate how well you are adapting to this new chapter of your existence. The analytical mind has finally run out of arguments, choosing to abandon its long post at the watchtower, recognizing that it no longer needs to defend a fort that was never truly in danger of collapsing. You are letting your entire identity drop down into the cool, silent depths of the present moment, allowing the unfamiliar contours of your reality to just exist without requiring a single explanation from the dark. Let the heavy, soothing warmth of this total non-resistance travel up through the base of your skull, releasing the tiny, subconscious bracing patterns that gather when you are trying to force your thoughts into a rigid alignment. Your eyes are completely soft behind their lids. Your breathing has slowed to a long, rhythmic glide, and the invisible weight that lived behind your collarbones has completely flattened into a loose, unhurried wave of pure presence. There are no sudden transformations waiting to surprise you in the corners of this space, and no invisible judges are standing over your bed to measure the speed of your emotional recovery. You have crossed the threshold into an ancient, timeless domain where your only task is to let the mattress take the absolute physical burden of your frame, letting gravity carry you forward while the world continues its slow, unmapped turning in the shadows. Think of how the vast bedrock beneath the mountain terrace feels during these quiet, midnight hours, when the cold rain has ceased and the heavy mist has completely swallowed the outlines of the stone walls. The solid stone does not shift its placement because the surface mud moved during the storm. And it does not carry a sense of panic because the old irrigation ditches are filled with silt. It simply remains exactly where it has always been, an immovable foundational presence that accepts the changing weight of the seasons without a single ripple of internal friction. You can allow your deepest nature to match that same undisturbed stability tonight, letting the dark blanket of the evening mute the lingering echoes of your daytime anxieties until your mind is as quiet and unbothered as the deep mountain granite. The ancient understanding that true peace is found not in removing the current, but in changing your relationship to its movement, is settling into the very marrow of your bones now, filling your body with a deep, comforting density that needs no validation from the past to authorize its rest. You are finally realizing that the integrity of your journey does not depend on keeping your life perfectly static, but on your willingness to stop treating an unexpected shift as a personal catastrophe. By letting the stream find its new level without throwing a single wall in its path, you have dismantled the hidden machinery of your panic, allowing your true uncarved center to rise softly to the surface. The unmapped roads and the missing answers can remain precisely where they fell, untied and unpolished, without casting a single shadow over your fundamental worth. Let the total darkness of the evening wrap itself around your awareness, like a heavy, seamless garment that carries no seams and no restrictions. There is no longer any digital screen to check for reassurance, no old routine to rewrite in the theater of your imagination, and no comparison loop to run through your mind before your limbs are permitted to go completely slack. The world beyond your window pane may continue its complex, demanding movements, but within this quiet pocket of warmth, you are entirely exempt from the performance. You are the wide-open sky within which the storm has finally run its course, a vast, unchanging backdrop that remains perfectly serene and whole whether the clouds are heavy or light. With every slow, quiet breath that slides past your lips, feel yourself drifting further away from the rigid names and definitions that kept your identity bound to the wheel of constant productivity. Your hands are perfectly open, your wrists are completely loose, and the long, tense lines of anxiety inside your forearms have dissolved into a smooth, liquid comfort that pulls you down into the deep velvet of the midnight hour. You are returning to the uncomplicated truth of your own baseline existence, a deep, primitive sanctuary that has never been scratched or diminished by the evaluations of others or the sudden blockages of your creative journey. The night has opened its most silent, timeless chambers to receive your weariness, offering you a place where you can exist without a single goal left to justify your place on this quiet earth. As the final, faint images of the winter printmaking studio and the elderly ink master dissolve into the deep, dark current of your resting mind, the entire world outside seems to draw a single collective breath of absolute surrender. The iron tools are cold on the timber workbench. The horsehair brush is dry. The black pine soot has settled completely in its stone basin, and the entire landscape has found its perfect equilibrium under the silent snow. There is nothing left to guard against, nothing left to fix, and no masterpiece left to prove your right to inhabit this spacious dark. You are fully permitted to let go of the tapestry, allowing your heart to follow the slow, steady rhythm of the night as it carries you home into a profound, dreamless, and unmeasured sleep.